with HDR, what we would do is we use HDR to compensate for the limitations of our camera. The camera can't fully capture the dynamic range of the scene. You've got highlight information up here. If we zoom in, there's no highlight information. It's blown out. And actually, if we bring over the histogram, you can see that we've totally clipped our shadows up here in the top left. You have no detail in the shadows here. Now, what if we can take multiple exposures and combine them together? So this is where I was starting at. You can see here what I'm doing is I'm bracketing. So I'm kind of intervaling. Is that even a word, intervaling? But I am taking exposures at an interval. And you see how I'm getting more detail up here in the highlights. And then I'm starting to get, oh, look at this. Now we're getting detail in the shadows. Okay, more detail in the highlights, even more detail in the shadows. So we've got all this information. We just have it across these exposures. Now we need to combine them. To combine them, we can do one of two primary ways of combining for HDR. The first is called tone mapping, which is what we're going to do exclusively on this webinar. The second is called exposure blending. And exposure blending would basically be, I would take, for instance, these two exposures, this exposure and this exposure. Let's just compare them. In exposure blending, what I could do is I could take this part of this scene and blend it in here. The only problem is that because there's so many complex shapes over here between the stairs and in between these rails over here, the mask would probably not look very good. So tone mapping actually has a very important place for HDR over here. There's a quick question here as to whether I use JPEG or RAW. Peter asked me that. Now, you might see here, these are actually JPEGs. All of these images here are JPEGs. For webinars, I compress my RAW images, which I do shoot in RAW exclusively. I compress them to JPEG to speed things up because I use a 5D Mark II, and the 21 megapixel images, they'll take longer to process. So what I do is I export these out to 3,000 pixel JPEGs for webinars. And so I'm going to take these images here. Let's start tone mapping. Now, this is a very debatable topic. Everyone, what do you use to tone map? What products? Well, there are some heavy hitters in the industry. Obviously, Photomatics by HDR Soft is the one I'm going to use. That's one of the more popular ones. It's probably the most popular one. It's been around, I think, one of the longest. There's also Nik Software has HDR Effects Pro, which I really like. And someone was just asking me earlier, if I would use HDR Effects Pro. I use it sometimes, but I prefer the tone mapping algorithm of Photomatics. And I'll show you why. There's also HDR Express and HDR Expose 2 by Unified Color. Photoshop has HDR Pro, which was introduced in CS5, I think. And then there's Olanio Photo Engine for Windows only. So there are a lot of products out there. But I prefer Photomatics. And I will go over, I see a few questions about the bracketing. I'll promise you I'll go over the bracketing here. Let's just go through one of the processes. The question about bracketing is, all right, well, how did you get these images? And I'll go over that afterwards. I just want to start one image so we can kind of get our feet wet. So what I'm doing here in Lightroom is I'm selecting all of the images. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to Export to Photomatics Pro. Click that, and then this dialog box comes up. Now, we'll just go do a walkthrough of the options here. The first option is to align the images. If I was hand holding the camera when I was taking these brackets, I would turn that on. However, I use a tripod pretty much all the time. I take my tripod with me everywhere. And so the camera was perfectly still. I don't need to align the images. Reduce ghosting artifacts. In the event that there was something moving a lot, like there was a flag or there were trees or people, then I would turn this on to reduce the ghosting, but we don't need to do that because the image is static. I don't reduce noise in this part of the process. I reduce noise later on if there is noise. The reason also why I don't reduce noise is because the 5D Mark II produces barely any distinguishable noise. I do turn on chromatic aberration. reduction, rather, chromatic aberration reduction. And that what that will do is that will help reduce. There's sometimes when you have a very high contrast scene where very bright areas touch very dark areas, you'll get chromatic aberration. It's a defect of lenses. It's also a defect of processing, where you'll get this like fringe, this color fringing along the edges. This helps reduce it. I don't show the 32-bit intermediary file. We don't need to do that. And from Lightroom, I always just have this first checkbox selected, which is automatically re-import. If you select this checkbox, whatever image you have selected, even if it's in a different folder, it will stack with that image, and I don't like that. So I do this, and then I'm just going to rename this. I usually add a suffix, -HDR, and then X. This last character, X, that's my code for which tone mapping product I use. And I've gone over this in the past. X is for Photomatics. K is for Nik HDR Effects Pro. P is for Photoshop. And then there was U for Unified Color. But here, because I'm using, and then there was O if I was doing all in the O. So here I'm doing X, and I'm going to hit Export. And what happens is Lightroom sends the images over to Photomatics, and it starts comparing each image pixel by pixel. And when it's done, it gives you this tone-mapped image. So, right off the bat, this is looking good. We have some work to do, and so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reset everything to factory defaults. And I can do that by hitting the default button over here. I like doing this for the webinars because it helps illustrate how to work Photomatics. The other thing I always recommend, I always bring this up, is you really want to have your histogram. Your Photomatic, I use the luminance histogram to show me the tone curve. And so what you can bring that up by going to View and then 8-bit histogram. So it shows you right here. Now you can see that we have a beautiful tone curve. We've got all the detail up here in the highlights. We've got beautiful detail in the shadows over here. And now it's time to kind of customize. Because this scene is pretty grungy to begin with, I usually bring the strength slider up to 100%. And now we start playing around with sliders. The first thing I notice is that my highlights are blown out. And you can tell they're blown out because on the histogram, if you have data bunching up along the right side, that means that you're losing highlight information. The same thing is true on the left side with the shadows. If you have information that's bunching up over here, that means that you've lost shadow detail. And we want to prevent that. Now I know right off the bat that I'm blowing out highlights because for some reason the default setting for the white point in Photomatics is 0.25%, which is way too aggressively high. So I'm going to drop that down. And once I do, I instantly, if you look at the histogram, I instantly fix that. I'm also going to bring up the black point. Now we can start kind of refining. A lot of these things are pulley systems, everyone. Like, for instance, the white and black points, I use them in tandem. I also use these two sliders, luminosity and detail contrast, in tandem. I'll bring up luminosity a little bit, and then I'll also bring up detail contrast. But just a bit. Here's the key. This is the big key, everyone. You do not want to use this product to stylize your image. And by stylization, I mean you don't want to try to achieve a certain look. So you might be asking, all right, Brian, well, how do you stylize? What do you mean? Well, a lot of times if you just take the luminosity slider and the detail contrast slider all the way up, you see how you're starting to get the stylized image? You're starting to get this look over here? You don't want to do that in your tone mapping product. There are better ways to stylize your image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly reset this to default. And again, strength down, or strength up, white point down, black point up. And this is where we were. Now I'm going to increase the luminosity, which brings up some of the highlight details. Detail contrast brings out the shadow details. It gives you a little bit more of a local contrast boost. And then there's the lighting adjustments. This lighting adjustment slider stands alone. This is what gives you your overall HDR effect. The more you bring it to the left, the crazier it looks. The more you bring it to the right, the more natural it looks, but you also lose some of that information here. So usually, for me, I really stick around -1 to -2, depending on the scene. So I will never really go past -2. But in this case here, I don't need it that much. And the way that people really muck up HDR is by going to this lighting and effects checkbox. You don't want to check this box. And then you click on something like surreal, and then you scream and you cry and you hide under the bed because you've essentially destroyed your image. You don't want that. Let's not do that. Let's turn off the lighting checkbox and use the slider. It's a much more natural look. Before I advance, I'm going to look to see if there are any questions. Cody asked me, all right, so you're using Lightroom to organize your images. Could I just simply copy the files to a folder and put them into Photomatics? Absolutely, positively. I could have just gone to Photomatics here and went to File, Open, and opened up those images. So you don't need Lightroom. I just use it. Michael's asking why have the 32-bit intermediary HDR image option. The reason for that, Michael, is because you can save that 32-bit intermediary file as an HDR file or as a radiance file. It basically is, you can take that. So I could have taken that 32-bit intermediary file and opened it up in NIX, HDR Effects Pro, or I could have opened it up in Photoshop for HDR Pro. You basically are taking that intermediary file. Think about it. It is what it says it is. It's this in-between file that you can open up in various tone mapping products. So a question could be, well, Brian, all right, you said you like Photomatics better. Basically what I did was I took that 32-bit intermediary file into various applications and I looked to see which one gives me the result I like the most. And so that's what I did here. I like Photomatics the most. What version of Photomatics am I using? That's a good question. I am using, I think 4.1.3 is the latest that I think they have right now. Do I save the 32-bit image as a radiance? Yes, I do, Jane. I do save it as a radiance file. That is the format that I use, if I do it. I don't do it very often. And then there are a lot of questions here. Both Gary and let's see, Gary asked a similar question as Damien did in terms of before I tone map, do I do any processing or correction to the image? Let me first save and re-import this, and I'll tell you. The answer is yes, but there's only one thing I basically do. So again, the question was, before I get this image here, do I do anything to these images? The only thing I would do in advance is I would do white balance and color correction. So I oftentimes shoot a color checker passport by X-Rite, and then I'll get the correct white balance, and I'll apply it to all of these brackets here. But I will not rotate. I rotate at the very end. I rotate and crop at the very end. I don't do... It's really important, everyone, that you do not make adjustments to your images here. Do not adjust the contrast. Do not adjust the brightness. Do not adjust anything. Just deal with what you have, and then adjust everything on the tone mapped image. Because you've already gone to the lengths of getting the exposures for this dynamic range. You've gone ahead and you've done this. So by messing around with the exposure information of one of the brackets, you're going to ruin your tone mapped image. So does that make sense? No, I don't touch the noise. I don't, Alex, I don't adjust the noise either on the brackets. I will adjust the noise of the tone mapped image because this is now my working image. This would be, in a perfect world, my single exposure that I took. I didn't want to have to tone map. I don't want to deal with that. That's just an extra step. But I had to because my camera couldn't deal with, all this information. So in this image, I would apply the noise reduction. Oh, it looks like 4.14 is the latest version out right now. Thank you, Sharon and John. I appreciate that. Frank's asking if having too many brackets could have a negative effect or generate more noise. It depends. It could. If you shoot your brackets at a high ISO, it could increase the noise. It will also increase the file size, but But yeah, so is there ever too much? Yeah, you definitely don't need to have 9 brackets. You just want to make sure that you have the correct information. Brian, I shoot at ISO 100. You could see it right here. This was my 14 millimeter lens, and I was shooting at ISO 100 at f6.3. Yes, so John brings up a good question. If you adjust the white balance, do you sync the exact same changes? Absolutely. So what I would do here is, oops, that was quick. I'd go to let's say I'd go to this image here. I'd get my white balance. Now this is not a good image to do it on, but I get my white balance by going to the develop module, and then I'd take my white balance dropper, and I'd select white, or if I had my color checker passport, I would select the white balance there. And then I would take that image, I'd select all the other ones, I'd deselect the tone map, and then on the bottom right here, there's a great button called Sync Settings. I'd bring that up, I'd turn everything off, and I'd only select white balance. And what that would do is it'll synchronize the white balance value to all of the other brackets. Now I have a uniform white balance. This image here, though, the white balance was pretty good to begin with. We really didn't have problems. So I was happy with the results. Oh, Bob asks a great question. He asks if I have a set aperture for all the exposures. That's a great question. You really, really, really do not want to adjust your aperture in between brackets. So you can see here, every image here was 6.3, 6.3, 6.3, 6.3. Because what you're doing is by adjusting the aperture, first you're also adjusting your shutter speed, but you're also changing your plane of focus or your depth of field. You want the image to be uniform across. And I'll go, again, there are questions about, how I get my brackets. I will go over that. This is a tripod, Vivian. Absolutely a tripod. So here, let's stylize this image. So this was my point. My point about all of this is tone mapping is just used to get the even exposure. It's used to get your baseline. Now I can send the image to the Perfect Photo Suite and start having fun with it. And so the first thing I'm going to do here right off the bat is go to Perfect Effects rather. And I'm going to start adjusting this image. I know right off the bat that there's this yellow over here and in the graffiti that I really like. And so I want to accentuate that. To do that, I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, and I'm going to drop down under the Effect options here. I'm going to go to the Color Enhancers. Now with the Color Enhancer selected, I'm going to go to the Color Range drop down, and I'm going to go to the Yellow channel. So this now allows me to affect only yellows. I'm going to increase the saturation, and I'm going to increase the lightness. What that does is it makes it, you see how it gets a little bit brighter? Now notice one thing. Notice that I'm only affecting, I'm doing things to small parts of the image. This is important. This is something that I always try to teach, is look at the elements of your scene. So for me, here are the elements of the scene for me. I've got the tiles, I've got the stairs, I've got this upper area with the sign, and then I've got this pathway and the graffiti over here. These are all different elements that should be treated uniquely. So right off the bat, the first thing I want to do after adjusting the yellows is give it a nice kind of kick in contrast. To do that, I'm going to apply a black and white layer. So I'm just going to go here to something like Dawn Treader. That has too much of a glow, so I don't like that. I'll go to Casablanca. And then I'm going to go to the blending options. And I'm going to change this to multiply, soft light, hard light. Soft light looks good. Now, it does a good job, but it's too strong, so I'm going to drop the strength down. All I'm looking for is a little bit of a contrast boost, and I'm blending in the black and white layer on top of the color layer to do that. So you see what I'm doing here? You can see the before and the after if I turn off that layer right there. That's without the black and white layer, and that's with the blended black and white layer. Now let's continue stacking on top of each of the images. I really want to bring out this information here in the pathway. And so if I go to movie looks over here, I'm going to hover over and try to find something that gives me a cool look, like Havana. So you see what Havana does? I don't care. Forget about the rest of the image. Don't worry about the rest of the image. I'm caring about what it does over here. And I like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my masking brush. I'm going to bring up the inspector. And I'm going to invert the mask with this invert button. And what that does is it hides the effect. And it puts me in a paint in mode. So with a paint in brush, I can go ahead and paint that in over here. So you see what I'm doing? I'm bringing out that information. It's awesome. It looks awesome. This is getting me very, very happy because it's drawing the eye. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit add. Now notice, all I did was I applied the effect just for this area here. Nothing else. You don't, just because you apply an effect doesn't mean it has to go to the whole image. You can choose where the effect will apply. I might also do it up here on I like what it does to the orange, so I'm going to bring these out a bit. Now, you can see that I painted outside of that, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my painting mode from paint in to paint out, and I'm just going to draw all around the circles because I don't want to, oops, that's no good. I'm being too sloppy. I don't want the effect to break the border of the circle, so I'm just kind of, and you see how meticulous this is, and some people could say this is just too much, and that's fine. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I do like what it does about bringing out the orange in those colors. I'll hit add to commit that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a tonal contrast effect, which will give me texture. So under the effect options, I'll go to tone enhancer. And you see what it does? It brings out texture in the image. I'm going to bring out some of that tonal contrast. And then I'm going to mask it out from the top. I only want it to apply to the tiles. So I'll just take my masking brush and really quickly, in a big fat brush, I'm just going to mask it out from this top part here. I want it to apply to everywhere but there. And I'll also bring the strength down because it's a bit too much. Finally, one of the things that I want to do is I want the eye to go down the stairs. Now, the way that I think we can do that best is by taking a dark brush and kind of creating a path down the stairs. So I'll show you what I mean here. Under the color and tone category, there is a darker effect. Now it darkens the whole image. I just want to darken part of the stairs, and so I'm going to do what I did before with my brush. First thing I'm going to do is under the sliders here, I'm going to drop the brightness down some more, and I'm going to increase the blacks just a tiny bit. Now with that done, I'm going to invert the mask just like I did before. I'm going to bring the brush opacity, so the strength of the brush is going to be not as strong, and I'm just going to kind of draw a path like this. And also I'm going to paint out now, and I'm going to undo any effect here. Now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to do the opposite. I'll hit add, and I'm going to add a lighter effect. Go to my masking brush, invert it, and now I'm going to paint in on the stairs here, creating a pathway. See how a pathway is forming out over here? Let me bring up the strength of my brush so it's even stronger. And there we go. So we've got this cool little path going down the stairs. And so watch, let me do this. I'm going to hide the effects bar, and we're going to see the before and the after. To toggle the before and the after in Perfect Effects, you'll hit the Command P key, or Command plus P, or Control Command plus P on a Mac, Control plus P on a PC. Too much alliteration. But you can see here the difference. Here's the original, and here's the after. I mean, just looks awesome. And you've got, because we tone mapped, you've got that information in the sky, you've got the information in the pathway. I'm going to hit apply to let it do its thing. And now while it's processing, actually that was quick, I'm going to save the image and go back to Lightroom. So let's put this one here for a second. I just want to do a kind of like a before and an after. Okay. So what we have here is an image. Actually, that's not the best image. This one's good. Okay. So we have an image that's kind of an average exposure, but we don't have any detail over here in the shadows. We don't have any detail in the highlights, but we have a detail overall. Then we tone map. And now we have a nice even exposure, right? This looks good. And then we go ahead and we stylize it. And now we get it to a point that it's like, oh, that's pretty awesome. So let me see if there are any questions. Am I using a mouse or a tablet, Zachary? I am using a Wacom Intuos 4 tablet. I will, to the day I die, beat my chest to Wacom. I love them. I think they're the best. It's the most helpful tool for me. So, yes. Oh, Rob asked the same question. The girl on the left disappeared. That's a great observation, Caleb. I noticed that too. So there's a girl actually here in the Lightroom right there. The tone mapping algorithm must have toned her out. You can actually see her. Here, let me see if I can fill it. You can kind of see, you see her right here? It just wasn't, it wasn't in the exposure long enough. And so, oops. Yeah, but that's a great call, Caleb. I noticed it too. I was wondering if the tone mapping would pick it up, but it didn't. And then in stylization, it just looks like a reflection. So it actually works out to our favor. Also, if you notice over here, there's a lot of movement. Right under here, there's a lot of movement. But it's just something that I know I won't have to worry about. Can I get her back? Sure. That's pretty easy. We can probably, let's see here, if you want to get her back, it's actually not a bad idea. Take this image, and then where was she in? Was she in here? No. There she is. Okay, so this one, and we'll take our final image and send it to perfect layers. So we're taking two different images, sending them over. And so let's bring the tone map copy up. Let's hide our image bar. And so she's right over there. So I would take a masking brush. I'd probably bring down the opacity so it's not very hard. And then I would start bringing her in. So you see kind of how, and then I'll turn off the layer because I want to see where else she's, okay, so that's her hair. We need to bring her hair in. And so what I'm doing is at a lower opacity, I'm painting in a bunch of strokes until she shows up. And then let me see, was she in that other rail? Yeah, she was. That was her, her jacket, so I need to mask her jacket in. And so I think we're getting there. And a little bit of this, her front part. So yeah, we can mask her in. I agree with you, Patty. It does add a little bit more interest. You assume that Paul's asking if the suite recognizes pen pressure. Absolutely. Right over here, Paul, there are two options where I can use the pressure of my pen to control the brush size and the opacity. I don't like using either of them. I never use them. I use the actual, on my Wacom, if you go to the preferences, I use this touch ring here to control my brush size and my feathering. So you can see here, brush, feather. I like that much better because I can, over here, if I go back to the brush, I can just use the ring, go up, go down, and then change it to feather and adjust the feather. It's pretty baller. What was the advantage of bringing in the blending in the black and white contrast and using? That's a great question, Gene. So Gene's asking, you remember I took that black and white layer and I blended it in? Why do that versus just using a contrast boost? Because I like some of the black and white effects that we have. They're not just basic black and white. They have little tints to them, or they have a little glow. When you blend those in using soft light, hard light, or multiply, you're getting those attributes, but you're not getting the loss of color. You're only blending in the tone. So I hope that helps. Oh, Paul asked a great question. I was just talking about this with that same engineer, Paul. The question that Paul asked is, how much pre-visualization do you do before capturing the bracketed images? When I was standing here, as God is my witness, I knew what I was going to be doing here. I knew the effects that I was going to apply. I knew that I was going to use lighter and darker effects to draw the eye through here. I use these products like Perfect Effects and Photo Tools as the predecessor so much. I've used them for so many years. When I'm out, when I see a certain element, like I see the orange over here, I know, all right, I'm going to do this. So there's a lot. There's a lot. I shot this. I put the camera down with the 14 millimeter prime lens on at this angle specifically because I knew that the 14 millimeter prime lens would give me the proper linear distortion to give this a compelling look. I knew that if I angled it downward, the handbars would come out kind of in this jetting fashion. I knew that the stairs would bow out like this, and I knew that the wall would kind of distort like this. I also knew that this over here would be straight because of my plane of focus. So you get to know your hardware and your software. I know how to use my glass. I've used it. It just kind of comes with experience. And that's why I'm blessed, why I thank God that every day I can do these webinars with all of you. I can teach you this stuff, or at least how I do it. You can do it totally differently. But, the key is maybe you can take a little bit of one of my tips and meld it into your own way of doing things, and now you've got a new system in place. So that to me is the greatest thing in the world. So let's move on. Let's see here. Let's do a landscape image here. Because I have a few other. I've got this subway image. This was taken at the same day, and then there was this urbex scene right here. It's I processed a similar image, but I selected all these images because they all have merit to HDR. HDR has a benefit. So let's work on this image here. Let me just see if there are any questions. Joseph, you're asking where was this photo taken? Are you talking about this truck scene or the subway? And then the subway. The subway was taken in Manhattan, New York City, on the Lower East Side at Essex Street Station. This is I'm from New York City. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, so this is my home. I came and visited my family for Christmas and New Year's this past year. I live in Portland now, Portland, Oregon. So, all right, this was taken last year after Photoshop World Las Vegas. This is in a ghost town called Nelson. It's about 45 minutes south of Vegas. I'm just looking right here at the questions. You don't care that you changed the J and Z line emblem from brown to orange? Oh, I did? Alan, J and Z. I didn't even know that. Alan, I'm colorblind, and these look orange to me. They don't look. I guess they're brown. I have no idea. I thought they were all orange, which is why I did them uniformly. That's great. I used to live in Boston, Joseph. Actually, I lived in Boston for about 8 years. I just moved from Boston here. I lived in Framingham. So what I want to do here is I want to use HDR to bring out detail along the whole image. You can see that there's some cool stuff here. And as I expose for the shadows, first of all, we're blowing out the rest of the scene. But look at all these cool springs and all this grossness. This is cool. And so what I'm going to do is let's tone map this. I'm going to go ahead and select all these images. And we'll do that again. We'll go Export, Photomax Pro. Nothing is moving here, so I'm not going to align my images. In the next example, we'll actually reduce the ghosting. Actually, no, we won't. We'll do masking instead. But I'm going to go here, dash HDRX, and send it off. Topsfield. The home of the Topsfield Fair. My buddy lived in Danvers, so I'd always go up there. Can you use lens correction prior to tone mapping? You can. That's okay, because the lens correction will adjust the perspective. As long as you apply it uniformly to the whole to all the brackets, you're okay. The lens correction will also work on the tone mapped image. So actually, if I go back here before we start tone mapping, and I go to the tone mapped image over here. I go to develop, and then we scroll down. We turn that on. I don't. Is there a 14 millimeter profile? There. Oh, it's doing 15. I thought that there was a 14 millimeter profile, but if there is, I don't have one. The point of the story is, yes, you could after the fact. Or if you want to do it more naturally, yeah, you could do it to the brackets. And what that does is it corrects for any distortion, and it corrects for any natural vignetting of the image. And I think it also corrects for chromatic aberration. So let's go back here, and let's fit this to screen, and let's start tone mapping. So look what we have here. We have a great image, nice, evenly exposed, except we do need to refine it a bit. In this case here, I'm going to drop the black point down a bit because I'm getting a bit heavy on the shadows over here. And I'm going to increase the gamma, which is the brightness. Now here's this gives me an opportunity to give you a kind of a tip that I find very, very useful. When you're tone mapping, when you're in this tone mapping, remember I said we're not stylizing here. We're getting an even exposure. However, if anything, rather be safe than sorry and make the image a bit brighter than you normally would. The reason for that is when you stylize your image, a lot of times it has a strong effect on the brightness of the image. So while this may look good, this right here might look really good, and it does look cool. If I go to stylize it, it's going to darken things up even more. So by increasing the gamma, maybe by increasing the luminance a bit, and by decreasing the detail contrast, you're getting a brighter image while still maintaining a nice even exposure. So let's stick with this, and let's hit save and re-import, and we'll go to the image right there. So watch, let's compare these two images really quickly. So the image on the left is probably what you'd get with a single exposure. Notice how you have not much detail and definition in the sky, and you have very little definition in the car. But on the tone mapped image, we have nice detail in the sky. We have this, for the most part, other than some minor changes in color saturation, these are pretty much identical images. Except I have detail inside the car. I mean, tell me if you disagree with me. But if I look back and forth, within reason, I'm talking about within reason. They're not identical pixel for pixel. But if you look over here in the dirt looks natural. The mountain range looks natural. And the car looks natural. That's the key. That is the key to tone mapping. That is the thing you want to strive for. Because now I can take this image, I can take the tone map image, and now I can apply my creativity to it. Now I can go to the suite. Oops, I actually have to select it. Oops, where am I going? There it is. Okay. And we can go to perfect effects. Now, there was the question earlier about pre-visualization. Right off the bat, desert scene, I go to movie looks, and I go to thermopylae. And then I drop the strength down to 0, and I bring it up. I just love what thermopylae does to the overall image for deserts. I don't know why, just something gets me. I'll hit add, and then next thing I'll do is I want to add a little bit of more detail to the car, and something like Moulin Rouge will do that. I'll drop that strength down, and then I'm going to go to the blending options and go to, let's see what multiply, soft light, hard light. Ooh, hard light looks pretty cool. Multiply looks cool also. But I'm going to go to hard light. I'm going to take my masking brush, bring up the inspector, and invert it, because I only want it to apply to the car. So now I can kind of paint. You see what it's doing? What an, oh, that is cool. See, this was an image I actually never processed yet. This is the first time I'm taking an attempt. So all the stuff I'm doing right now for this image is new. It's experimental. So I might actually put this on my blog. What I'll do now is I'm also going to bring up the mask. So under the inspector, there's a show mask dropdown. I'm going to bring up overlay because it's going to show me if I've missed any areas. So I can see right here I need to paint. Here, let me move this out. I need to paint this information. I'll get rid of those dust spots in a second. But you see I kind of have to get up here. I'm not worried about the total edge. And then right through here, and down here, and down here, and then inside here. What I don't want is I don't want the windows. I don't want what's through the windows. So I'm going to hit X and paint that out. And then when I'm done, I'll hide the mask. That's looking pretty awesome. If I want more of that effect, I can increase the strength up here. So that's looking, I'm loving what it's doing. Let's go hit add, and then if there's anything else, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would do here. Maybe a little bit of a glow, a tiny, tiny glow, something like deep forest. And then we'll drop it down to 0 and just bring it up a tiny bit. Something like that. So if we kind of hide the effect bar, again, Command P or Control P, that's our original. That's our after. Original, after. And if you want to get really nuts, we can go add. Let's bring up our effects bar, go to Cyberpunk. And the only thing I want to do for Cyberpunk is, again, invert the mask. And then with a tiny little brush, this little hood ornament. Let's make that like this cool blue. And then drop the strength, because that's a bit too much. But let's drop that strength down. And what it does, it really pops off. We can also add it to any chrome element, like this right here. Oops, that was a sloppy job. Sloppy masking draw. Let's just go up like that. And there. And then if you want, you can go to any other chrome elements in here, like the little window lever. That, to me, is what that shows a sign of greatness in terms of taking the time to take each element here. I can go ahead, watch this. We can go add. I can go to the photo filters and then go to the green enhancer and bring out the brush over here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get it to a strength that I like, so something about like that. Again, masking brush, invert, and just paint it in where I want it. So I just paint it in through here. And maybe on this mountain. And boom. Before, after, apply, save. And then in Lightroom, let's do it this way. Okay, Lightroom, mid-range exposure, tone mapped image. So look at that, nothing. What's over here? I have no idea. Oh, there's actually all this grossness. And then we stylize it. So I forgot to get rid of the dust spots, so I could just go to the develop module, use the spot tool, spot healing tool, and just select that, select that, select that. And we can, and I didn't do this in the previous image, I forgot, but we can, now we go into Lightroom. I'll usually do things like I'll bring up contrast. I'm going to drop down the highlights a bit. I'll also increase clarity overall just a bit. And then I'm going to drop the saturation and increase the vibrance. Also, I'm going to take my big fat spot healing brush and get rid of that right there. This shadow is driving me crazy. So I'm going to take that, and that goes away. I'm able to. I'm also going to get rid of this rock over here. That works. And there we go. So that's that. Let's work on another image, but before we do, why is rusty metal always so spectacular? Such a great question, Stephen. Stephen's asking about rusty metal. Why is it always so good for HDR? Because you're bringing out more tone in the rust. So all this patina here, all the rust, there are little bits of highlights and shadows and midtones. You're bringing it out. That's what the tone mapping will do. Now you can do that with a single exposure here. Like I can go to this exposure right here, this normal exposure. I can go to Lightroom and take an adjustment brush. And with the adjustment brush, I'll bring up the clarity, I'll bring up the sharpness a little bit, and I'll bring up a little contrast and a tiny brightness. And I can bring out texture. You can do that, but tone mapping does something just wildly different. The art is in the details. Ron, that's so true. Do I have anything with bright colors? I don't know if I have anything for this. Could you please take an interior scene as well? An interior scene. Do I have one here? Let me see. I don't know if I have one here or if I had one prepped. Let's see. Oh, here's an interior scene. So this shot here, I took this in an abandoned school. Now, this is a common experience for interior scenes during the day. So let's say you wanted to. I'd say that if your camera took a shot right now, it would give you something along this, because you have, for the most part, you've got your mid-range. You see right here, you've got most of the detail, but you also have blown out highlights, and you've got some pretty clipped shadows. They're not totally clipped, but they are pretty clipped. And as we bring that out, you can see that information. So let's go ahead here and let's tone map so you can to see the difference. I'm going to go to File, Plug in Extras, and we'll go to, we'll go to Export to Photomatics. And then we'll go here to HDR. Now, we're getting close to the end of the hour. I'm not going to drop off. So if you guys want to stick around, we'll do the other image, and I'll go into more detail of the hardware side of HDR. So right here, very, very bright. I understand that's not a problem. We can fix that. The reason why it's so bright is because the gamma right here is way up. So if I drop that down, we start getting our information. Also, the luminosity is pretty high, so we're going to drop that down a bit. And I'm going to drop my white point down. So now we're getting, okay, look at that. You can see the wall. You can see the little light switch. You could see the janitor's broom or their mop. You can see the little fire extinguisher. If I click over here, look at that little fire extinguisher. You know, the detail is perfect. Everything is great. This was at a, what was this? What aperture was this? I have to look at the XF. Oh, I was borrowing my buddy's, he had the 85 millimeter Zeiss with the Canon mount. Oh my God, what a beautiful lens. So I shot this here. And what I'll do is, I might drop the adjustment a little bit more to bring out, no, let's drop it up. There we go. That's good. So let's bring this back and we can kind of see the difference. So here is, oops. Let's see, so that, and compare it to this. I mean, look at this. It's just a nice, even exposure. It's even. It's not stylized, but it's even. You can see the wall. You can see all the detail on the floor. It's all good. So let's stylize it really quickly. So in this situation, what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and send it to the suite. And this time we're going to use Perfect Effects and Focal Point. So with Perfect Effects, I'm just going to do something quick and dirty. Because I want to go on the other image as well. There's a little lesson I want to show you on the other image. We'll go to Movie Looks, and I'll probably do something like Blue Dawn Leonidas. We'll drop that down to 0 and just bring it up a tiny bit. Hit Add. And then I'm going to add Urban Sickness, because Urban Sickness is going to give me this kind of weird, funky look. Again, drop it to 0. Bring it up slowly. There we go. Now we're starting to get somewhere. I'm going to add a tonal contrast layer, so tone enhancer. Drop that strength down to 0, bring it up a bit. And what that's doing is it's giving me texture everywhere. And I think a little bit of a glow. Tiny, tiny glow. Again, just like the previous image, we'll go to Deep Forest. Drop that down to 0, bring it up. And then I might try blending that in with, let's see what soft light does. Hard light. Soft light's good. I'll drop that strength down a bit, but it adds a nice look. So if we see the before and the after, here's our before, here's our after. Straight from Perfect Effects, I'm going to click on Blur, which will send this image over to focal point. And I'm going to show you how we can use 4 focus bugs for this image. Let's reset everything here. So here's our focus bug. And what I want to do is I want to create, I want the plane of focus to go, I want the depth of field to be kind of like around here. And I want this wall to go out of focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my shape from round to planar. So now my focus bug is a plane. I'm going to put it on the ground, down here. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the amount of blur because we don't want it to be that out of focus. I'm going to go ahead and drop this down significantly. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at this area right here. I could care less about everything else. I'm just looking at this. So I'm going to bring this down to about 3. So it's just slightly out of focus. I'm going to click on the plus button right here to add a second focus bug. Again, here's another focus bug. I'm going to change it from round to planar. And I'm going to put it on the right wall. Somewhere around there. Repeat the process. Now when you add new focus bugs, the amount of blur is the same, so you don't have to change it. Same thing, let's put it on the left wall. And what I'm doing is I'm matching up the focus and the blur. And then one more, 4th focus bug. Planar, make it horizontal, and then put it all the way up top here. So now what we did was we kind of created the shallow depth of field. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the brightness of that background, boost the contrast, increase the highlight bloom just a bit. And that's looking pretty awesome for me. I'll hit apply. And now when we're in perfect layers, you can see we have the focal point layer, we have the stylized perfect effects layer, and then the original tone mapped image. So that to me is pretty awesome. Oops. There we go. So now I'll hit save, and that's what we were able to do. Bada bing, bada boom with the suite. So, you know, we went from this to that. You know, and that just looks really awesome to me. I might, if I had like a really silhouetted character, I might mask him or her in over here, but turn the exit sign on. That would have been that would have been cool, Terry. That would have been a good idea. There's not much I could have done with that. I could probably go to the develop module and, you know, what can I do? I mean, I can probably do an exposure increase, tiny bit, and a little bit of a saturation increase, and just kind of paint it over here. But yeah, I don't like it. While we're in Lightroom, though, what I will do is I will increase the contrast, increase the clarity a little bit, and again, drop the saturation, boost the vibrance in equal amounts, and maybe a tiny bit of a post-crop vignette. Increase the feathers so it blends, and that's looking pretty cool. That's looking pretty cool. Maybe drop the exposure just a tiny bit there. Yeah, that's looking awesome. So Donald, you're asking how does the focus bug differ from selecting a different lens, meaning a physical lens? And while Donald's answering, John's asking the difference between the gamma and the luminance slider. The luminance slider will increase the highlights, John, like the whitest parts of the image. The gamma is your brightness. It will brighten the whole image up evenly. Couldn't you have increased the red for the exit sign? Carl's asking. What I could have done was I could have increased the luminance of the red channel, but I can't paint in a red luminance with the adjustment brush. I could probably in Photoshop, but if I increased the red channel I guess it doesn't do anything. I can't see red to begin with, so I don't know. Keith is saying that Joel Grimes would put a football player in this hole. You know it. You're probably right. Oh, that's funny. Went from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock. That's cool. That's a good call, Joseph. I like that. Why did you defocus the doorway? Because it adds a little bit of drama to the scene, in my opinion. I think it adds a little bit of a moodiness. That's why. Yeah, it adds depth. Exactly, Ron. Most of the exit signs are green. Oh, another color I can't see. I can't. I'm red-green colorblind, and apparently I can't see brown. I had no idea. So let's go ahead now. Yeah, you're right, Joseph. The janitor's work is never done. How many brackets, Chris is asking? This is 9 brackets because this is a very, very, very high dynamic range image. You've got your highlights. So you start exposing for these bright areas. And then you start exposing for the midtones and then the shadows. So what do I use? Before we go on, you know what? I'll save the 4th image for another webinar. Let's spend some time on the hardware. Let's go to Chrome for a second. So what do I use? I use a product here called the Promote Control. I'll put the URL in the chat module. So it's this little device right here. It's kind of pricey, but it's $330. The reason I use it, this doesn't really apply to any Nikon user who uses the D700, the D3, and I think the D300 actually, because Nikon allows you to bracket more than 3 exposures. Canon, in all of their infinite wisdom, limits you to 3 exposures unless you use the 1D series. So think about it. Did I put that? I did put that. If I can only take 3 exposures, I might not get the full tonal range of the scene. And so what this device allows me to do is it allows me to say, all right, my mid-range exposure is 1/60th of a second. I want my stop increments to be 1 stop, which is what I do. So if I have 9 exposures, I have -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2, +3, +4. Usually in that exposure swing, I can get what I need. And then I say how many exposures. I'll punch in 9, and it tells my 5D Mark II how to do that. Both Stephen and Joseph said the D200 allows it as well. Now we'll see. My prediction is within the next few weeks we'll have a new Canon, probably a 5DX or a 5D3, in addition to the 1DX that's coming out in March. And my prediction is that they won't. The 1DX they will, but my prediction is the 5D series will not still allow for more than 3 exposures, which is a shame. Timothy's asking if that Nicole Young is doing a webinar on time-lapse on Thursday. Have you ever done HDR time-lapse? No. Actually, Nicole's my girlfriend, so it kind of works out that way. It's kind of nice that way. But the HDR time-lapse is something I've never experimented with because I just haven't had the opportunity. However, I've seen stuff, and it's jaw-dropping. So... So Gene's saying, okay, he can only bracket 3 as well. And so you'll get the -1, 0, +1, and then -2, 0, +2, and -3, 0, +3. I used to do that as well. I'd use the custom function keys, the C1, C2, and C3 of my camera. Only problem is, and this is just me being crazy, you really shouldn't, you want to minimize touching your camera, even to move the mode dial. In between brackets, because by moving the camera even the slightest amount, you ruin your brackets. You misalign the brackets. So it's really important. Now HDR panos, Alex, that I've done. HDR panoramics I've done In fact, I don't have one to process, but I can show you one right here on my Google page. How do I? Oh, we could just go to plusbrian.com. So if we go to the photos, that's me. Here is an HDR panoramic. Hey, where are all my images? Oh, I went to the wrong album. Sorry. This one. This right here. So this right here is a panoramic HDR image. In Austin. So I took this was 3. So this left window was 3. This middle window was I'm sorry. This left window was 9 brackets. This was 9 brackets, and this was 9 brackets. So it's a 27 exposure HDR. What I do is I tone map this left image. I tone map this, and I tone map that using the exact same settings, and then I blend them together. I stitch them together. I wonder if I have any other panos, HDR panos. That's not an HDR pano. That's a regular pano. Here's a pano. This one is a more recent one. This is Seattle from the Space Needle. This is actually 40 exposures because I did 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get this ultra wide view. And then I processed it in Perfect Effects. How much overlap? So what did I use for the pano and how much overlap? So that's Terry and Alex. I actually used my tilt shift lens. And there's a good website here under photography. It's called, and I'll put this lens here, the digital picture. Here, I'll put this link. This is such a wonderful website for lens reviews and stuff, and I'll show you exactly how I did this. I took it with my Canon 17mm lens. So if you go to Canon lens reviews, and then there's the 17mm tilt shift lens. So this is the lens I used, and then here's the cool thing. If we scroll down, he's got this really awesome little animation. All right. So what I did was I shifted. You see how the lens shifts? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's shifting up and down. Picture me shifting from left to right because you can rotate this horizontally. So I was shifting. Oh, I can actually rotate it here. There. So wait a second. No. How do you do it? I guess you can't. He doesn't have it going left to right. But that's my point is I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then 9 exposures, 9 exposures, 9, 9, 9. And then, so Karen's asking about the clouds and the water. What about that? Well, in the shot here, the clouds were not moving very fast. So you can see there's no ghosting. It's really when you have clouds that are moving very, very fast, you'll get that ghosting, and it's something that you'll have to do on a case-by-case basis. And the water was at such a distance that it doesn't even look like there was any ghosting. I wasn't concerned about it. Does Nikon have shifting lenses? Yeah, Keith. They have a 24mm tilt shift, and I think a 50mm. I can't remember. Nikon has their share of tilt shift lenses. My buddies have them, but Canon ones. Nikon does not have the 17. This is the bad boy. This is my beauty right here. So, 85mm tilt. Thanks, Sandra. Have I worked with the Gigapan Pro, Terry? We actually have one right here in the office. I haven't had a chance to use it. Yes, so Jason's saying, did I say that I was shifting without tilting? Correct. I never tilt my lens. I use focal point for that purpose. What Jason's referring to is tilting. You see how the, let's reset this. And then tilting, you see how the front element is tilting? That will give you that miniature effect. The proper reason why you would tilt a lens, very few people really, I shouldn't say that. I don't like doing gross generalizations, but the reason why you tilt a lens is to actually increase your depth of field to pretty much infinity. But what people end up doing is they open up the lens to its maximum, or its widest aperture, in this case, f4, and you get that kind of, Vincent Laforet does it a lot with that kind of miniature toy model effect. The problem is that, and I've done webinars on this, where I've taken an image tilted like this, and then I've taken it head on and used focal point. And in every case, focal point gave a better result. The exact same result, but sharper. Because when you tilt your lens, you lose sharpness. So, and just to confirm, Stephen was saying the Nikon has the 24, 45, and 85 millimeter tilt shift lenses. Yeah, it changes the plane of focus, but I can change the plane of focus and focal point just as well. So what other questions do we have? I have a meeting in 20 minutes, but I'll be happy to go over some more questions. I'm sure I missed some. Oh, what software did I use to stitch? Zachary, great question. And Jane's asking to refresh the focal point webinar. I promise you, Jane, in March we will do it. The session that it used to be called "To Tilt or Not to Tilt," and I will do that again. So I promise. The panel stitching software. Most people are happy with Photoshop. In fact, Photoshop does a really nice job of stitching. I use one called AutoPano Giga, and I'll put the URL. It's a small French company. They're kind of pricey, but in my opinion, these guys are the best in terms of stitching. I don't know why their site is taking so long. Let's just do this, color.com. That's a bummer. I'll just type the name in and you guys can search it. It's AutoPano Giga, and it's at color.com. So I really like them. Rick is asking a great question. Rick is saying, does the tilting of the lens apply to architecture when you're trying to get straight lines? No, Rick, that's the complete opposite. Or not the opposite, but to get those rectilinear lines, meaning the straight lines, you're shifting. This will maintain, give you the proper rectilinear lines that you need. And they give you ideas here or examples, like right here. So, okay, horizontal shift. Here's a perfect example of what I did for my pano. I shifted my lens horizontally. So you see how I'm basically getting. Now imagine if this is obviously close up, but imagine if this is a 17 millimeter lens at the top of the Space Needle, how wide you get. And then this is the example of the vertical shift. So basically you're shifting your lens. You see how I'm trying to get straight lines? So something right around here at -6 gives me straight lines. So that's what an architectural photographer would do. I don't do the 360 panos, Timothy, the planet ones. I like them. Correct. John's asking. So is my point that I don't have to rotate my camera? Exactly, John. Because I have the camera stationary, and I'm just using the shifting functionality. I don't ever have any parallax or any weird shifty where the panel bows out. In fact, if you know what, I will do a panorama webinar in March as well. Thank you, Marion. Yeah, well, that's a great idea. So Paul's asking for a recommendation for a good and stable tripod. I need to know what your budget is. If you have no budget, if you like, I have $1,500 to spend, then you go to Really Right Stuff. This is what I have. These guys make. Where'd my mouse go? I'll just use my Wacom. Oh, there we go. Tripods. So Really Right Stuff carbon fiber tripods, and I've got the TVC-23. So this is the tripod, the legs that I have. These legs make me cry. I love them like a child. It's just a great tripod. And then I also have the ball head. I have their BH40 ball head. Now, if you want something that's definitely fantastic and a lot more affordable, if we go to Amazon, Manfrotto makes a really nice carbon fiber tripod that I have actually as my backup. Manfrotto, 190CX Pro 3. There it is. So I have this tripod, and I like it. It's, what is it, 270 feet. See, I bought it on August 11th in 2009. I'll put that in the chat module so you guys can see it. It's a great tripod. Gitzo, I have nothing against Gitzo, but I've been using Really Right Stuff for so many years, and they take such good care of me. For instance, my Really Right Stuff tripod needed servicing. I sent it in. Before I sent it in, they sent me a loaner tripod first, overnighted, and paid for the shipping back, and will send my tripod back without a penny out of my pocket. So to me, that is fantastic. The link to the first tripod, you got it. Well, actually, before I do that, this is the ball head. Whether you go with the Manfrotto tripod or the Really Right Stuff, in my opinion, this is the best ball head on the market, bar none. And then this is my 23 tripod. These are the sticks that I use. So what head did I use? So before I got these legs, I used the BH40 head on this tripod. However, I also have as a quick, I have this right here. I think this is the one. No, there's a better one. The 496? No, I don't remember which one I had. But something like this will do just fine. The reason why I don't like these tripods, the reason why I like Really Right Stuff is because if you're using a heavy lens, the camera is mounted to the tripod by this one plate right here. And if I go into a vertical position where I put the ball head down, a lot of times I'd get a sag. The camera would actually sag down. The nice thing about the BH40 or the Really Right Stuff is they have these L brackets. So if you go here for the 5D Mark II, for instance, they make these L plates. This is the one I have. And so what this does is, instead of, I can mount it vertically or horizontally. See, there's the vertical jaw, and then on the bottom is here, this is right there's the picture. And there's no sag. So then, Paul, if that happens to you, maybe go for the Manfrotto legs, these legs over here, because they're not that expensive, and then spend the money on the BH40 head. Because that head is, I mean, I know so many people who use that head. The other popular head that people have if you use really heavy lenses is the BH55, which is their Big Daddy. I don't like it because it's way too big. I don't have any lenses that heavy, so I don't need it. Martin, great point. Martin brings up actually a very important point. Not only do you not get sag, you also maintain the perspective of the composition. Absolutely, positively, 100% correct. Because when you tilt the camera into a vertical perspective here, your camera used to be up here centered. Now it's sitting on the side, and so you're skewed. 100% correct. Yes, Gene, the L plate is the key, because what it does is it's mounting. I don't know why it's taking so long. Our internet's pretty slow right now. You're mounting it on the top, so the camera's actually sitting on top. Keith is asking, after you edit your first set of 9, how do you save the settings and run as an action? Oh, great question. So what Keith is asking is for the pano, for instance. With Photomatics, Photomatics is sticky, meaning it'll remember the last state that you used. So I'll process the first window, for instance, the first panel, and then all I'll do is I'll take the next series of brackets, send it to Photomatics, and just hit save and process. That's all. Or save and re-import. I don't touch anything. And I repeat the process. Does that make sense, Keith? Are some of the lower quality HDRs a result of too few exposures? It's a great question, Cody. Yes, that's part of it. If you don't have the right exposures, so watch. Let's do an example. Let's do something like let's do this one. Let's just see. It might work. This one, and this one. So we'll take 3 exposures, and let's send them to Photomatics. Oops, not the suite. Those 3 will send them to Photomatics. And let's see if we get a comparable tone mapping. So instead of taking 9 exposures, let's take 3. So I can tell right off the bat that the quality right here, so notice how everything's the same, right? I'm going to hit save and re-import. So I'm not touching anything. And let's compare the 2 images. So this and this. The one on the left is the 9 exposures. The one on the right are the 3 exposures. For the most part, everything is good except for the highlight information. It looks better over here. And we have better information in the shadows. I don't know if it's coming across as well over the webinar with the compression, but on looking at it here, I can tell instantly that over here in the highlights, the quality is much higher. There's also a little bit more chromatic aberration over here. Also, Joseph saying that he can see the sign better on the left than on the right, which I think. Peter's asking for a link to Photomatics. Photomatics is what I use to tone map, and so I'm going to put the link in the chat module for the company. It's HDR soft. And absolutely, so you tend to get more noise in shadows. Like just look over here in the shadow detail. It's just cleaner than it is over here, and that's because we fed in more information. Do I ever cheat and create an HDR from a single shot? I haven't in a long time, but I can show you what that means just to give people information. This was Steven's question. Have I ever cheated to get to create an HDR from 1 exposure? Yeah, back in the day I used to, but once I got that promote control, I never really needed to, and that goes with me everywhere. And so I'll show you how to do that using Lightroom. Let me see if there's a better example. Let's just do this original image right here, and we'll take the mid-range. So here's the mid-range exposure, all right? And what I'll do is I'll filter this out really quickly so that we just see that 1 exposure there. So with the Canon 5D Mark II, the RAW file, and actually this is a JPEG, so it's not going to be as good, but you typically get about 2 stops of exposure information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 4 virtual copies. The way that I create a virtual copy of this image in Lightroom is I go to Photo, and I go to Create Virtual Copy, and it's Command apostrophe. So I'm going to do that 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I'm going to go to the Quick Develop settings in the library. I'm going to go to this first image, and I'm going to drop it down 2 stops. So these double arrows, you see how it says Decrease Exposure 1 stop? I'll do this 1, 2. Then this, I'll do 1 stop. This, I'll do 2 stops up. 1, 2. And this, I'll do 1 stop up. So you can see what we have. We have kind of like a fake 5-bracket sequence. And now what I can do is I can take all 5 of these images, which we created from 1, and send it to Photomatics. We'll call this test. Now, what's going to happen here is this. Photomatics is going to be like, whoa, what have you sent me? Because what Photomatics is doing is it's looking at the shutter speeds. It looks at the EXIF and says, wait, this image is 1/40th, this is 1/40th, they're all 1/40th. So what you have to do is you have to tell Photomatics that this was a one-stop increment. So 2, 1, 0, minus 2, minus 1, and hit OK. And so here's our image. It's actually not bad. First of all, because we have now that girl, because we sampled from one image, we can play around with this. I can go ahead and increase the luminosity. I can increase the white point a bit. And I can increase the gamma. And now we have a good image. So let's save and re-import. Let's turn that star off. And then let's turn off the ratings. And so here's the 9 exposure, and then there's the okay, a few things. So this is the original 9 exposure. This is the single exposure. Look at the sky. You have a nice blue color in the sky over here, but in the tone mapped image you don't have any of that color, and also you have that chromatic aberration actually in both images, but it's more apparent here. The chromatic aberration is, do you see this strip of color over there along the edges? Like I said, it's against high contrast, so high contrast is going from bright to dark. So you've got this chromatic aberration, which is pretty easy to remove. But notice how we have a much nicer detail in here than over here. Still, it's good. It's passable.